Grand Teton National Park is one of nature's hotspots in Wyoming, attracting visitors from across the country with its breathtaking Teton Range, wildlife, lakes, and alpine vistas. Over 3 million people flock to the park every year to create lasting memories through its diverse recreational opportunities. However, on rare and tragic occasions, some visitors encounter incidents that lead to their deaths in the most disturbing ways. Here are 5 such disturbing deaths and the stories behind them. Gary Falk was a family man with a wife and 2 young sons, working for the Exum Mountain Guides, an organization that leads groups to the summit of Grand Teton. For over 12 years, Gary dedicated himself to his job and was known to spend summers in the park's Jackson Hole and winters in the San Juan Mountains of southwest Colorado, guiding other explorers as a part-time job for another organization named Mountain Trip. On July 23, 2016, Gary went on a routine climb to the summit with a group of students from a program called City Kids. During the upward journey, they encountered no issues, successfully reaching the summit as planned. But just as they began their descent down the mountain, something happened. According to reports, the downward journey required that each person use a friction descending device known as an ATC. However, Gary realized that he had no ATC to himself due to a last-minute rearrangement of climbing teams from his company. Instead of seeking assistance from his company, Gary chose a more risky approach to solve a problem. He planned to use a belay rope to recover a dropped ATC device that a chaperone had lost. Unfortunately, when the chaperone rappelled down to retrieve the ATC, both the device and the rope became stuck in a crevice during their ascent to the summit. Despite the setback, Gary remained determined to solve the problem himself. He attempted to dislodge the jammed rope and ATC by flipping them within the crevice. Tragically, during this attempt, Gary suddenly fell a harrowing 2,400 feet to the unforgiving rock face below. The group he was with then contacted Teton Interagency Dispatch to report his fall, while still shocked and devastated by the incident. Immediately, park rangers launched a reconnaissance flight with a helicopter to assess the scene. 2 rangers then rappelled down and hiked to reach Gary's location. Upon their arrival at the place where Gary fell, they determined that he was already deceased and needed no medical attention. Then began arrangements to recover his body, and they eventually used a helicopter long line to do so. Meanwhile, another Exum guide helped Gary's clients down the mountain to safety. It's believed that while Gary was attempting to free the stuck equipment, he leaned out from the rock face, putting tension on his self-belay tether, known as a lanyard, which was securely anchored to his rappel rope. Unfortunately, the tubular webbing which Gary had tied into a loop with a water knot to tether himself to the anchor came untied, resulting in his tragic fall. This theory was supported by shreds of evidence obtained by the climbing rangers who retrieved Gary's body. They had found the webbing still attached to Gary's harness with a hitch knot, but its 2 ends were not tied together as they needed to form a tether. In the wake of Gary's death, Wyoming's Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, launched an investigation into the safety practices of Exum Mountain Guides. While OSHA determined the company wasn't directly responsible for Gary's death as he used his personal gear, they did identify violations of safety regulations. Specifically, OSHA cited Exum Mountain Guides for failing to ensure the adequacy and proper maintenance of employee-provided safety equipment and maintain a written plan to limit guides' exposure to bloodborne pathogens during first aid procedures. As a consequence of these violations, OSHA imposed a $7,350 fine and mandated compliance with the aforementioned safety regulations. Gary was laid to rest days after the coroner officially certified that he was deceased. A GoFundMe campaign was later established to support his wife and children, raising nearly $200,000 to help them cater to their needs. Christine Susinski had spent decades of her life as an accomplished opera singer, performing in places like Sydney, Venice, and Tokyo. Not only was she a great singer who was sought by many opera houses, Christine was also a multi-instrumentalist, wielding the cello and French horn with impressive skill. However, as she approached her old age, she decided to give it all up and move to Victor, a small town on the southeastern edge of Idaho. There, she learned to fly glider planes and eventually became an instructor, a pursuit that deepened her lifelong love of nature. On June 9, 2018, she embarked on one of her usual trips to the sky, just as she had many times before. Accompanying her in the passenger seat of her non-motorized glider was a friend named David Ross. Just before takeoff, Christine discussed the planned route with her tow-pilot, whose name remains unknown. At the time, nothing seemed out of place, and the wind conditions were identified as calm. They even completed the pre-flight duties for the glider together, ensuring that the trip would proceed without any issues. Eventually, the tow pilot and his plane, along with Christine and her glider, took off from a location in Idaho. They soon reached the foothills of Darby Canyon at 11,500 feet above mean sea level, experiencing little lift at that time. Throughout the entire flight, the tow pilot maintained radio communication with Christine as they worked together to find lift and gain sufficient altitude for the glider's release. When they finally reached an altitude of 13,800, Christine then released the glider, leaving the tow pilot to return to the takeoff airport without incident. Kristen was expected to arrive at the scheduled terminal point within an hour of releasing the glider. However, she neither arrived nor attempted to communicate with the front desk to provide an update on her situation. After an hour past the expected arrival time, the front desk manager tried to contact her via radio but received no response despite multiple attempts. He waited for a while, hoping that contact would eventually be made. When none came, the glider was reported overdue, and an alert notice was issued to the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. But just before a full-scale search and rescue effort was launched, the owner of Teton Aviation Center initiated a private search of his own using a helicopter. Guided by Christine's last known cell phone coordinates, the glider was located wedged between Middle and South Teton, above Iceflow Lake, at an altitude of approximately 10,800 feet. Sadly, it was in a wrecked state and appeared to have collided with a ridge along the side of the mountain. The Teton Aviation Center then notified the park authorities of the wreckage location. A search and rescue team subsequently reached the scene, confirming the fatalities of Christine and her passenger. Utilizing a long-line helicopter operation, the remains were recovered and transported to the coroner's office. When the aviation accident report was eventually released, it provided no clear answers, which only deepened the mysteries surrounding the crash. Investigators found no signs of pre-flight mechanical problems or missing structural components. They also claimed that the glider was airworthy, after ascertaining that it was properly assembled and that its record showed it was properly maintained. It was later speculated that Christine might have passed out during the flight, although it was never confirmed by the investigators. Teton Mountain is one of the many spots in Grand Teton National Park where many hiking enthusiasts typically visit. Among those drawn to its challenge were Tyler Strandberg, Catherine Nix, and Rebecca Anderson, three friends with a shared love for hiking and outdoor sports activities. On August 22, 2015, they attempted the hike of this 12,300-foot natural structure, known to be the sixth tallest peak in the Teton Range. According to reports, the trio were not novices to climbing and had tackled several other mountain areas in the past. When they began their hike via Tewanat's east face without using ropes, they likely felt confident and untroubled about potential incidents. It was also known that the area they chose to climb was rated a 4.0 on the scale of difficulty. This rating indicates that, while good route-finding skills, mountaineering experience, and caution are necessary, the area is not considered highly technical by the park authorities. However, as the trio climbed the mountain, they lost sight of the official trail, a common issue for many who had previously taken this route. They soon found themselves far off course in a much more technical and dangerous area. As they attempted to navigate back to the correct trail, the unexpected happened. Tyler and Catherine slipped off a ledge and plummeted 200 feet. Rebecca, left behind in a confused and panicked state, was also unable to continue her journey either up or down because she was stuck on her own precarious ledge. After a while, she then took the initiative to contact the emergency dispatch center using her cell phone, which she still had with her. She informed them of the incident, explaining how she had tried calling out to her friends but received no response, which led her to fear that the worst had happened. Following the report, 3 rangers were dispatched via short haul to the location where Tyler and Catherine were believed to have fallen. Upon arrival, they discovered that the worst had indeed happened, as Rebecca had feared. Tyler and Catherine were found unresponsive, lying on the hard rock with their bodies severely mangled up. It was evident that they had lost their lives upon impact. After consulting with the park medical director, the rangers pronounced them dead at the scene. With nothing more that could be done for Tyler and Catherine, the rangers shifted their focus to rescuing Rebecca, who was still trapped on a ledge. 2 of the 3 rangers who responded to the call climbed steep and technical terrain for about an hour to reach her at 11,300 feet. Once they reached Rebecca, they prepared her for evacuation, and she was eventually short-hauled with one of the rangers to safety. Meanwhile, the remaining ranger rappelled down to meet his colleague, where the bodies of Tyler and Catherine lay. Their bodies were later evacuated to the coroner's office and subsequently picked up by their loved ones. It was later revealed that climbing the mountain had been one of Catherine's bucket list items for the summer, before she planned to move to New York in September to pursue a doctorate in child psychology at Pace University. Tragically, this adventure turned out to be the last item she would attempt on that list, resulting in the loss of both her life and that of her friend Tyler. In mourning their loss, Catherine's family paid tribute to her in various ways. Her brother honored her memory by running in her place in the New York City Marathon just months after the accident. Additionally, a friend completed the 100-mile Leadville Trail Run, a race in which Catherine and Tyler had previously participated. On March 7, 2012, 2 friends, Chris Onifer and Steve Romeos, embarked on a backcountry ski trip to Ranger Peak, an 11,355-foot crag located at the northern end of the Teton Range. Both were veteran backcountry skiers. Chris had worked for the Jackson Hole Mountain Resort for years, while Steve was a dedicated blogger who avidly documented his skiing experiences. In the early hours of that Wednesday morning, the 2 set out on their journey and were expected back at night that same day. However, the 2 failed to turn up and were presumed to be missing after Chris did not fulfill his plan to pick up his father from Jackson Airport that evening. With Chris and Steve also failing to make any contact with the dispatch center, it became increasingly apparent that something was wrong beyond them just being missing. As midnight approached that same day, park rangers decided to launch a rescue mission. They began by sweeping trailheads popular among backcountry skiers in the park's South District, before expanding their efforts to the North District as more information became available. Chris's vehicle was then discovered near the Coulter Bay Swim Beach just after 12:30 a.m. on Thursday the following day. However, neither Chris nor Steve were found inside the vehicle. Despite a search throughout the night, there were no signs of their whereabouts. As dawn approached on the following morning, a search and rescue contract helicopter was deployed to ramp up the efforts to locate the missing skiers. Barely hours into the resumption of the search, 2 rangers aboard the rescue helicopter spotted an avalanche on a ridge that shapes the northern side of Waterfalls Canyon. Recognizing this as a potential area where Chris and Steve may have become trapped, the helicopter conducted a thorough search of the avalanche debris, using a transceiver suspended below to detect any signals from avalanche beacons. Before long, the transceiver registered 2 beacon hits, suggesting the presence of potentially human beings buried beneath the snow and debris. With the location now determined, a team of 7 rangers was flown back to commence a thorough probe search of the debris. Before noon that day, the lifeless bodies of Chris and Steve were discovered in a couloir on a ridge that comprises the north wall of Waterfalls Canyon. Steve was found approximately 150 feet from the toe of the avalanche, while Chris was located about 1,500 feet above Steve. Their bodies were then carefully removed from a relatively shallow depth within the debris. Initially, they were transported by helicopter to an accessible location, and then transferred by snowmobile to meet the coroner. Investigations into their tragic demise revealed that Chris and Steve were likely ascending with skins on their skis when a sizable soft slab avalanche was triggered, propelling them over 2,000 feet down the couloir. It was further determined that the cause of death was blunt force trauma, indicating that they succumbed instantly upon being struck by the avalanche. In the wake of the skiers' deaths, Steve's family decided to relaunch his blog, which had attracted thousands of visitors before the tragic incident. They meticulously cataloged the hundreds of routes he had documented during his lifetime. These routes included descents in the Tetons, Wind River Mountains, Eastern Sierras, and various locations around the world, such as Antarctica, Canada, Italy, Mexico, New Zealand, and South America. Chris was also fondly remembered as a dedicated professional who positively impacted the lives of many in the park. On July 14, 2014, Mary Margaret Beaulieu joined a guided climbing party for a hike to the summit of the Grand Teton, which stands at an impressive 13,700 feet. The team was made up of Mary, her climbing partner, and a skilled guide from Jackson Hole Mountain Guides. They embarked on their journey in the early morning hours to ensure they had ample time to cover the required distance and reach their destination safely. Given that Mary and her partner were accompanied by a professional guide, it seemed unlikely that they would encounter any significant obstacles along the way. However, just a few hours into the hike, Mary experienced an unexpected accident. As she was negotiating a short section of the climb below the upper saddle, at an elevation of 13,116 feet, she lost her footing and fell off the trail, plummeting to the bottom of the saddle. The climbing party immediately contacted the dispatch center for help, and climbing rangers who were on a routine patrol near the lower saddle moved to respond to their SOS. Despite their proximity and quick response, it was unfortunately too late to save Mary. When the rangers arrived at the location, they found Mary unresponsive, and every attempt to revive her failed. Despite wearing a helmet during the climb, it did nothing to protect her from the impact of falling from such a steep height. With no other options, the rangers pronounced her dead after consulting with the park's medical director. She was then evacuated by helicopter to the coroner's office for official confirmation of her demise. Meanwhile, other staff members from Jackson Hole Mountain Guides who responded to the scene escorted Mary's climbing partner down from the upper saddle to the lower saddle and eventually to a trailhead on the valley floor. Mary's death was shocking for one major reason. Earlier that year, she had successfully climbed to the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest mountain in Africa. This climb required her to cover a distance of almost 20,000 feet, a feat that many who attempt it do not manage to complete. It was evident that Mary was an experienced climber who knew her craft well and should have had no trouble navigating the Grand Teton. When news of Mary's demise reached her family and friends, they were shocked and devastated, given their awareness of her climbing skills. Her brother John Conley expressed their disbelief, stating that it was unimaginable that this could happen. He also described his sister as a very advanced climber and an all-around fitness buff. Away from climbing, Mary was a devoted and loving daughter, wife, mother, and sister. She was also actively involved in the family's Santa Fe tag agency in Edmond, and she participated in various charitable activities. To her friends, Mary was dependable, always showing up to help whenever they were in a bind, regardless of any discomfort it might cause her. She was eventually laid to rest on the 22nd of July at an interment ceremony attended by her friends and family.